I've just put a poll in the question while we give people a minute or two to join. Tell us where you're joining us from. I'm joining here from Guelph, Ontario, Canada. Chris, where are you joining us from?
From Minneapolis, Minnesota. So we're both up north, Martha.
All right, we got someone from Vancouver, BC here. Team Florida, Ashley, great to see you. Matthew from Boston. We got Chicagoland, more Northeast, Long
Ooh,
Island, Pittsburgh, awesome. Richmond, Virginia. Oh, Northeast is like rocking here.
yeah.
Also, someone else joining us from Toronto. Always love seeing sort of how, especially the community of healthcare digital marketers. We're all over the place, right?
Hmm.
Kind of bringing our perspective from sort of our local areas. Well, we're super excited. We have a packed agenda. Um, on conversations around how the world is changing in sort of this landscape of AI search and how digital marketers can prepare themselves for that. So we'll just give people one more minute and then we're going to jump right in. Oh, thanks. Amanda's joining us now from South Burlington, Vermont.
Ooh.
For those of you who have to drop off early or this will be recorded, and so if you have any questions or want to revisit it, that will be sent out.
Hmm.
So no worries there. So I'll just give everyone one more minute. For those of you that just joined, we're asking people to chime in on where they're joining from. We'll see sort of, right now the north, lots of people from the northeast of the U.S. Oh, another Floridian. Great. Oh, we got some more West
Ooh.
Coasters now joining in. Megan from San Diego, Michael from Chicago, Beth from Danville, PA. All right, love it. Well, let's go ahead and jump on in. We're going to start with some introductions. And those of you that have seen me speak or know me know that I like to introduce myself with a knowledge graph. So, this is who I am and how I'm connected to other things in the world. So, you can see my background is a technical background. I studied mathematics and engineering and got the chance to go to MIT. I am Canadian and I am the CEO and one of the co founders here at Schema App. But I did grow up in enterprise. And so I spent 14 years at Cisco, actually lived in California for a couple of those years, and really learned about the challenges of being agile and innovating sort of in an enterprise environment. And so a lot of that is what we applied when we built Schema App. I know a thing or two about schema markup. We'll talk a little bit about that today as we sort of talk about trends and preparing for AI search. And fun fact about me is I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. It was a super fun car. And my car was actually in the movie called Losing Chase. And Kevin Bacon used to drive my car because he directed the movie Losing Chase. And so I see Chris smiling because there's that game of 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon. And I use this to introduce myself because you've inferred that by understanding the connections between me and these and sort of the movie and my car. And that inferencing is the same thing search engines do. And so
Hmm.
I've used schema markup, the language of search engines, to explain those relationships. And so that's what we're experts in, and that's how we like to kind of explain what we do. Today's webinar is sponsored by Schema App. We are an end-to-end schema markup solution for enterprise SEO teams. And we build what's called content knowledge graphs. We'll mention this a little bit today, but if you want to learn more, you can go to our website. And we love working in healthcare. We have some great customers and partners who we work with in the healthcare area. So, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you. You're going to walk us through your knowledge graph. Introduce yourself for us.
Sure, absolutely. I love this concept of having a knowledge graph instead of a bio slide. So, I am Chris Boyer. I specialize in digital health, working with health systems around enabling digital health strategies. I'm also on a regular basis, weekly basis. I'm the host or co-host of a podcast called the Touchpoint Podcast. For those of you who don't know about it, please feel free to find us, touchpoint.health. I have done a lot of work as a in health systems as a principal, senior, and digital strategist. I run my own business right now, which is an LLC. You can Google me, and you can find, if you Google Chris Boyer, I'm probably one of the top people that you'll find because I've kind of mastered the SEO piece. But previously, I've worked at a number of health systems, including Beth Israel Lahey Health and Northwell Health across the country. But and here's my fun fact, right? I'm a jazz bass player, and I have a Warwick 5-string bass that was actually owned by Alfonso Johnson, who was a bass player for the Weather Report, which is a famous jazz group that actually got me into jazz. So it's kind of a circular. I might even have to put an arrow back to me, but that's my little fun fact about me as well. So I'm excited to be here today, Martha. It's going to be a great conversation.
All right. Now, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We want to know what your questions are. It's because hopefully going to be a dynamic conversation. But we're going to kind of tee it off but just sort of setting the stage, right? So, we've talked a lot about AI. I know every conference I've spoken at or attended, everything's about AI. We want to focus specifically on the healthcare digital marketer and
Mhm.
specifically about how the user experience is changing. So, Chris, like, talk to me about sort of how you see the landscape changing,
Sure.
and then I'll chime in as we go along.
Sure, it's interesting. I mean, search in and of itself has changed, right, since the advent. Think about like way back when you had indexes of Yahoo and Ask Jeeves and all that, where you could search, and then suddenly Google came into play, and they started to really focus in on certain aspects, like trying to develop some kind of prioritization or ranking of relevant websites based on what you're searching for in key terms. And as if you've been paying attention, right, through the 2000s into 2010s is when we started to understand this concept of relationships and how relationships work. And the reason why I'm giving you kind of this historical, because now we're in a place where we're really talking about understanding context and content together. And so what does that mean, right? So when you talk about the user experience changing, well, as search engines have changed over times, the users have changed the way they search, because we're at a point now where there's billions and billions of websites, and not all of them are meaningful. And so we've seen the terms or search patterns start to increase in terms of word counts, and they're really looking for some contextual things. I mean, back when I started, we were talking about like the best hospital in New York or whatever, but now it could get very nuanced in terms of how they're searching for the primary care physician in my area that can see me in the next 3 weeks or something like that. Those are the types of searches that we're seeing, and so clearly that also has an impact to healthcare marketers when they start to look at addressing their SEO and search strategies.
I love those vague searches because there's a lot of inferencing. So that example we just gave around Kevin Bacon, like there's a lot of that happening, right? The one
Mhm.
I use is like, oh, well, I have hip pain and I want to see a female physician who has an appointment available within 5 miles of where I am. So there's like a near me piece. There's sort of like inferencing what service needs to be sort of hip pain, like what is that and how do I figure that out? And who
Mhm.
has appointments available, who's like a female physician. So all those kind of dot connections. I think the other piece that's interesting is that I don't know, do you remember all when voice search was like the big thing
Yeah.
and everyone's like, "Oh, you can see what questions people are asking on voice search." The voice search piece has sort of now come into sort of the interactions, right? And maybe I'll ask a question to the audience on, like people are interacting also on different types of platforms, right? So Perplexity, ChatGPT, Google's AI overviews or Gemini, depending, or Bard, depending on sort of what version of it so you're looking at. So maybe my question is like, what platforms have you been using as consumers? And I like us thinking and reflecting on us thinking how we're changing, even though we're sort of maybe sort of like the informed user.
Mhm.
I've seen for sure, like how my mom asks questions. Like she's not doing keywords anymore. She's like asking a whole question when she does search. They're still using voice, but it's like voice in the text box versus voice
Mhm.
necessarily to like an Amazon or a Google kind of home. So yeah, Gemini, Perplexity, ChatGPT, those are good. The other thing that to know about these new platforms is also the users, like the context is staying. So when you ask a question like, what can cause hip pain, to keep on my example,
Mhm.
I might then say like, well, what are other symptoms of it? And that it is then how, like those new large language models are going to keep that context, right? And I think another piece is that people are truly looking for answers. Chris, like you kind of talked about this when we were kind of prepping for this, but like there's not sort of like 10 blue links, go keep looking,
Right.
right? Talk to me a little bit about like how the one answer is changing that user experience, especially in healthcare. Like what's the implication of that?
Well, the implication is pretty dramatic, right? I mean, and a voice search, by the way, kind of led to this concept, and AI is really putting fuel on the fire here, because really what's happening is that now there's no longer kind of a list of like 10 things to look for. you're given one answer, and that one answer is deemed by whatever search appliance you're using. If it's a ChatGPT or even Google with Gemini, etc., they're trying to sum up the best answer to that one question, and that's pretty challenging to get into that number one spot. We used to say SEO was a zero sum game, but if you could get in the top three, you're kind of okay. Nowadays, you can't. You have to be in the number one position or leveraged in the number one position in order to kind of claim that initial search, because they're driving you right into that specific answer, right, Martha?
Yeah, it's sort of like it's not good enough now, right? To be on the
Right.
first page, right? Like the first page is going to change. There was news actually from Google yesterday. They're going to get rid of the infinite scroll, so first page is kind of back. So that was sort of news as of earlier this week.
Hmm.
But yeah, like it's sort of now more important than ever, right? And I think what's interesting is that it's going to diversify too. So there are many platforms or many you called it search appliances or search experiences. I
Hmm.
think it's going to get very verticalized as well. And it was interesting. I was reflecting on where have we seen this before, and I actually thought about the travel experience.
Mm.
So, 10 years ago, like Expedia was like, we're going to go to that very specific website to help us find the answers we need in order to confidently book our travel, right? So we sort of went to this experience. They sort of aggregated all this information in order for us to find the best deal so that we could then book it. And what was interesting is like over the last couple of years, that experience has moved into search, right?
Mhm.
So now Google actually aggregates the aggregators, right? So they're like for if you're booking a car or booking a hotel, hotels.com and Expedia, they're all actually options. And the only like time you actually eventually go to that site is when you're converting, is actually when you're going to go buy. And this is going to show up as we talk about metrics, but I think we have to accept that we are going to lose more visibility of
Right.
that user journey through these different search experiences. And just like we had this aggregator experience in travel in that one very specific vertical, it's now available to every vertical, including healthcare, in a really real way. And so the example we've put here is like on Perplexity, where again, like I'm asking about cardiologists, it's giving me details about them, directly in the search result. And so again, like I'm not going to do the hard work to go to all the websites and go on your on-site search and click through all the pages. Frankly, like it's too much effort for me when I can get summaries and make a quick decision.
Yeah, and if you're outsourcing that decision about what's the best answer, right? So suddenly you have to become really well versed in understanding how your content fuels like generative AI, like Perplexity and others, and really get into the depth of that. And by the way, it's not lost on us too, right, Martha, that your whole paid search strategy is suddenly going to be upended because of this. How are you going to? You can't pay your way into being the number one answer in ChatGPT. Well, at least not yet, right? Um, and so that becomes a bit of a challenge too.
Yeah. So we try to kind of be like, what are some practical things that we can
Yeah.
do or that we're seeing we're doing or that we're hypothesizing we can do? And I think content is a big one, right? So
Hmm.
just when you thought we were just going to talk about search engine optimization, no, we are going to talk about content today. And so we talked a lot about this off your website. And Chris, maybe you can give me some examples of like, what do you mean by offsite? Like, this isn't like in our webpage. This is like, things happening in other places. Can you talk to me a
Right.
little bit what you
Well,
mean by
there's
this?
been this whole rise, and for those of us listening in, right, that have been involved in understanding your online reputation, understanding like listing management and aggregating content about you to other places, there is a richness of content that people are pulling from your organization, and they're empowering their own way for people of that. Again, I say search appliance. I could even apply that to like an insurance website, right? You could consider that into a mini extent a search appliance. So now you have to start thinking about your content being off of your website. So your content that is powering the things on your website is critical, because ultimately those things are being pulled somehow into other content that's created elsewhere. But here's the other trick, Martha, and that what we're seeing a lot, and this is something that came up with Google's recent searches, Google's recent changes to SEO, is that there's this whole over indexing on user generated content, what
Yes.
other people are saying about you, right? So when Google released, and all those challenges we had about the AI overviews, right, where they were publishing things about putting glue on your pizza and things like that, all of that stuff was coming from sites like Reddit or even Search Now, right? LinkedIn is coming up at the top of the search. These are user generated content areas. So when you start to think about this, right, your content is becoming much greater than the content you actually own. And we used to in the olden days talk about like you own content, you lease content, and and you pay for content, right? And lease content would be the things that are on social media platforms. Now what's happening is that this all becomes sort of a jumbled mess, and it's hard to differentiate where your content is in all of this, and developing different strategies becomes a particularly perplexing problem for your actual authoritative content. It's much bigger than your website, right? It's
Yeah.
much bigger than social now.
Yeah, and I think, those organizations I know that have like whole teams that do listening, right? Like, what is the strategy for that? I do believe that like over time we'll see them Google sort of, I'll say, like come to a more normal kind of
Mhm.
level of which they're indexing and prioritizing Reddit and so forth, primarily because the answers are wrong, right? And I think here, especially in the healthcare space, like the fact that they're giving wrong answers is very high risk. Now,
Yeah.
historically, we did see Google state that they were going to move slowly into kind of medical healthcare as well as finance. However, like the data has shown that that is not in fact the
Yeah.
case, that like they've been introducing SGE and AI overviews, in an accelerated way in healthcare. I don't have an answer why, like sort of what's motivating them there, but I think we need to understand that like that's something that like they're leaning into. And so my whole thing is like, well, how do we, our question was like, how do we take control, right? Like, how do we kind of think about it? And so, what we specialize in and sort of what we really work on is like, how do you make sure that the content on your website is truly understood and very consumable by these machines, right? Because
Mhm.
now the audience of who you need to publish to isn't just humans. Now, don't get me wrong, like Google's big focus over the last year has been around like helpful content updates, and helpful content is like writing things for humans. However, we need the machines to understand that content. And so, this is often where, I talk about schema markup. So schema markup is an SEO strategy. It's what we are experts in. That is this data layer, this translation layer of how you make sure that your content and the relationships between your content is truly understood. And it's a standard vocabulary. What's fun is it was actually created by Google, Yahoo, and Bing or Microsoft
Mhm.
back in 2011. So they've given us the dictionary, in order on how to do this. And historically, people only thought about this, or maybe you've primarily been thinking about is like, how do we stand out in search? So you would
Mhm.
get these rich results, they're called. So whether that be star ratings, but it's much, much bigger than that today. And so when we talk about digital marketers, like thinking about it, it's like, thinking about schema markup in that, like, okay, well, we can still stand out and you get a higher click through rate on that. But it
Mhm.
also allows you to improve visibility in these AI kind of search experiences. It's also a control point to reduce risk. And so in this world where like things are getting wrong really, really fast, it's a way that you can kind of control how the machines are understanding it. And then I think the last piece, and we're not going to spend time on here, but if you want to learn more, we have a ton of content on our website, is it's also helping you prepare your content for additional sort of innovative experiences that will be sort of AI or machine driven.
Mhm.
And so the one we're sort of exploring with our customers is like asking questions around like, are you an authority on a specific topic, right? So how do you know that you are sort of kind of known in that space? And so this is really, really key. Okay, we have a question. Let's stop and sort of jump into the questions. Oh, here, what's the simplest way to explain how schema is different from tagging? Yeah, so the way I explain it is that it explains context.
Mhm.
So it's explaining sort of just like my intro, the relationships between things. And so it's bringing context to the words on your page, whereas tagging it and is instead it's still just a keyword. It's not giving sort of any understanding of the relationship within the content in the page or other things on the site. So that's typically how I answer that one.
Can I add something to that, Martha? I think what's really
Absolutely.
interesting about that is that it provides context and also structures your content at the same
Yep.
time. And so what that does is it actually allows for the machines or AI or other things, other entities to know a little bit more richer things about you, right? So
Absolutely.
remember when we shared our interests, and I was saying I work for here and this health
Yep.
system, this health system, I do these things. Uh, right, you could go in now into these AI search appliances now and be able to, just by that mere structure of correlating all that information, they can create a really robust correlation between my work history and what I am an expert in, right? And so that is an example I often give, right? Is like showing like the different pieces together are interesting, but contextually putting them all together, it gives you a better result. And imagine doing that now on your website with your providers, and not only where they practice and if they're available for appointments, but then also what other content they've written or published. And now you get a really rich, robust information using schema about the context that's needed.
Yeah, the other way I explain it is sort of like you can explain what a page is about, or you can tell the story, which is like what the customer journey is actually like trying to understand, right? And
Mhm.
by connecting the dots, right, you're kind of dot connecting. You can really explain that. All right, we've had some questions around metrics, and we're going there next. So let's just like jump right in. So let's start with the questions, and then we can kind of cover some of the other pieces.
Mhm.
So the question is, as far as SEO metrics and even paid metrics, where will we start seeing the hit that shows people are using AI more and more? And so instead of clicking through, so kind of these more zero-click searches, how are we going to see that? Chris, do you want to take a hit at that?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, don't, this isn't happening 100% overnight, right? So those old ways of measuring are still very important. But one thing that, as you start to look at this kind of zero click search is certainly something that we're going to see more. And so those vanity metrics that you're looking at are certainly going to be that, right? So I think there's going to be a period of time where we're starting to understand, and maybe, as we kind of talked about before this, Martha, right, we're going to fly blind a little bit. But when you start to look through, how does it start to work in this new world? What are those relevant metrics for measuring effectiveness of AI search? Well, I think some of those get through to really understanding, um, not measuring it actually, clicks from Google to your website, but actually what happens more downstream within the entire information that you're presenting. So recently we launched, a very similar thing using some schema, an online appointment scheduling and platform. And what we were able to do is, rather than focus so much on how many people actually started the journey, but how many people actually converted right at the very end and actually reached those things. So I have a feeling that's going to be where we're going to start to look at expanding our measurement strategy a little bit. But Martha, I mean, you're in the expert here, so I'd love to hear what your thinking is on this.
So I do think conversions are key. And when I spent some time with Fabrice Canal, who basically runs Bing chat experience, he
Mhm.
was saying there'll be new levels in search of like impressions and clicks. So we'll see those change. Now we've already seen some of it, right?
Yeah.
So if you've looked, and we're used to in the Google world, like an algorithm change happens and there's like a new normal. So we're gonna, I think, still continue to see some of those types of fluctuations. But then I think the key is that instead of us again just looking at top of funnel metrics, we're going to need to look at conversion. So I think Chris, you kind
Yeah.
of nailed that piece. So making sure your organization can measure a conversion. I think the other piece I do like click through rate is conversion off search, right? So
Mhm.
the other piece is that Fabrice was mentioning like when you get someone to click through, they're going to be more qualified because they've asked a lot of contextual questions before they make that decision to click. Now, Bing, I would say, is better at giving us measures. Like they've included the chat experience in their
Mhm.
web metrics. But for all of us, like a very small percentage of our traffic is coming from Bing. Google has yet to give us a measure there, right? So,
Yeah.
good luck. So we're kind of back to the world of where when we had FAQ rich results, right, where we would bring
Mhm.
a lot of that information off your website into search, where we got like zero click through rate. So I think we're going to see more of that, frankly. I think the most important piece is that knowing that like you need to make sure your content is being consumed and showing up in these AI search pieces to even get a chance to play. And someone, asked the question, Kevin, around like, what am I seeing as click through rate increases? So it depends on, for the rich results. It can be, many percentage points higher, let's say, for a really effective physician profile. So if you have a very complete physician profile, and I love, like, I have examples from this where it's like where you're connecting to what services they offer, what
Mhm.
hospitals they practice at, in details about who they are and their ratings, right? Like, the ratings is just a piece. The key is like, can Google interpret all the other pieces to make sure it's a good intent? We also are seeing not just click through rate increase on sort of rich results, but also when we add further context. One of my favorite examples recently is when we truly define the regions that, or the location of specific medical clinics,
Mhm.
urgent cares, that we're actually seeing queries related to local. So that could be a near me, increase significantly after we add that, I'll say, more robust disambiguating schema markup. So again, I don't need you to know all about what it is, but just know it's a tool. It's called linked entity recognition. We're seeing sort of numbers increase there. And so again, when we talk about, like, if the levels of impressions and clicks are going to change, let's make sure we're getting the most conversion off of them. So the
Mhm.
question around, like, how do you get buy-in from a CEO level? I think the other piece is around this business measure around cost efficiency and agility.
Yeah.
There is This world is like, we're just at the beginning of this journey, right? We're going to see
Mm.
more disruption, and so I think, especially for larger organizations, having, again, a data layer that you control and that you can build stuff on and ask questions allows you to be agile, or even partnering with someone like Schema App kind of gives you that agility or that innovation partner. Because part of it's also going to be the cost efficiency, right? Like, how do
Right.
you make sure you're investing time with the right people to do that kind of rate conversion?
One
So
one thing I will add to Martha is this, right? I mean, if you think about it, a lot of people say, well, what is, it's easy to point to click-through rates as being like, that's a great metric to show it how
yeah,
effective
yeah,
we are. But that's only measuring one piece of the overall experience, right?
right.
And so now we have to expand our thoughts around measurement to be a little bit more comprehensive about what is our intent? Why are we using this? Are we using this to drive more appointments? Are we using this to, connect to certain audiences, or sharing different care experiences we have to different markets, and start to measure around that? So it's like moving away from this concept of a single channel metric to an overall metric, and then that brings in also that ability for the amplification and the cost savings around that.
Okay, I have one more piece that someone asked me a really interesting question, and so I'm going to put it out, Chris, to you. I haven't asked you. You don't know us, so it's kind of
Okay, here we go.
so. Someone asked me recently if they had a choice between investing in building and investing in personalization or on-site search and schema markup, with this sort of new move to, like, the search engines doing some of the personalization and doing a lot of that search, should they still be investing in personalization and on-site search, or does that become less important in this world?
That's a good question, and I can answer it one of two ways. But the answer, where my gut tells me, is that no, it's not a bad investment to do that. I guess I kind of answered that in a negative way. You should invest in personalization, because there are going to be a certain amount of people that are going to hit your website at certain points, and you need to be able to personalize. I think overall, though, you want to look at that opportunity of someone coming to your site as being, there are going to be people that maybe are not on the intent of finding care. The ones that are on the intent of finding care, you definitely want to personalize that experience and lead them to make that appointment, to take that action, whatever that action is. And so I don't think it's a poor investment. And even in the context of everything else here, schema and all the things that we've been talking about make sense from a personalization play as well, because that
Absolutely.
helps to give you context. That's, I guess, how I would answer it. Maybe that's a little bit kind of sitting on the fence there. How would you answer that, Martha? It's interesting.
Yeah, so personalization I like, because if you actually do schema well, you're building this kind of content knowledge graph that you can use for tagging and other things. For me, it was the on-site search, and I was thinking back to my life in um, I love content is king, context is God. That's interesting. Um, I was thinking of my time at Cisco, and this is like 2014. So this is a long
Yeah.
time ago. And I ran sort of the tools online for troubleshooting, and people were using Google instead of our on site search at Google at Cisco. And so part of me was like, that was in 2014. Like here we are 10 years later. How are consumers using on site search? I don't use on site search on websites, but that's like me as a user.
Mhm.
So I think, again, it kind of depends on the persona and like what does the data say was sort of where I wanted to go and explore. I run a schema markup company, so part of me is like, well, let's make sure that those that are searching on Google can find it through all those different means.
I've heard of
Um,
some health systems, by the way, that are trying to implement their own generative AI search interface on their own public-facing websites. So if you think about that,
Super
now that's a
interesting.
little bit of meta, right? Kind of coming in on top of one
Yeah,
another. So I mean, if you think about it, ultimately, I guess searching and clicking on things is outdated now, Martha. We have to get to a point where we just say, "Hey, computer," and like
go find
let
me
it
the answer.
go find me the answer and trust in it. And the only way to do that is to really think about it from a structured perspective using schema and context.
Content and context. I think that's a big thing. And I think the other takeaway, like, where is this world going? It is changing fast. And
Yeah.
so I would say the things, how do you sort of take action to kind of prepare for how it might disrupt? How do you be agile? And then keep asking lots of questions and then think about content, like think about content on site and off site. I think that's the key thing.
And
Um,
don't be scared of generative AI, right? Because right now they're just large learning modules, right? They're doing exactly what Google wants to do, which is taking all this crazy content and putting it in a personalized way. Ironic how LLMs are designed to be like putting it in a personalized way, but that's what they're trying to do. But they're moving very, very fast. So the Google AI overviews issues that we heard about like 2 months ago or a month ago, they're
Perfect.
resolving that,
Yeah,
right?
it's evolving so quickly, how quickly they can also manipulate. So we're out of time. I like to keep these short, active conversations. First of all, big thank you, Chris, for joining me for having a conversation. Chris, if someone wants to find you, can you give them one place that they can go look?
Yeah, go to Google. No, you can find me at christopherboyer.com is my website. You can also, if you want to find my podcast, just search for a Touchpoint, or go to touchpoint.health, and that's a great way to reach out to me. And I'm on LinkedIn, of course.
Amazing. And so if you want to get with touch with us at Schema App, www.schemaapp.com, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We'd love to have a conversation to see if we can help you sort of make sure that you're prepared and thriving sort of in this new world of search. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.